Hello everyone, my name is Ismail Shahtakhtinski. I'm the principal immigration attorney at IS law firm. We just got the exciting news that the USCIS adopted a policy memorandum making the TPS holders who traveled outside of the United States and returned back to the US be considered as lawfully admitted for the purposes of adjustment of status, despite the manner of their initial entry before they were granted TPS, which is a temporary protected status. Temporary protected status is a Protected TPS is a status which is given to those individuals whose country has been designated by the Department of Homeland Security for the purposes of TPS. For example, we recently had Ukraine designated because of the ongoing war, designated for TPS. That means all of the nationals of Ukraine who have entered the United States up until or before the April 11th, they are eligible for TPS. Similarly, Cameroon was recently designated for TPS, and many other countries have been designated for TPS and have been able to renew their TPS status year by year from many different countries. But as a way of background, what it means for TPS holders. For purposes of adjustment of status inside the US, the beneficiary of the adjustment of status has to be lawfully admitted into the US. That means they did not cross the border, jump the fence, or somehow been smuggled or entered the United States without inspection at the border. Those individuals would not qualify for adjustment of status under any circumstances, including through marriage with a U.S. citizen, unless they've been granted asylum. Now, there have been some other exceptions as well, but mostly this was troubling for those individuals who entered the United States at one point without being inspected, and then they got married with U.S. citizens and they're trying to apply for adjustment of status. That didn't work. So what was the solution in the past? They would travel, they would get the TPS status in the US, and then they would get a travel document, advance parole. They could travel outside of the US and return back to the United States and then become eligible for adjusting their status. In 2020, the Board of Immigration Appeals put a stop to it. They issued a decision which stated that travel on advance parole for TPS holders doesn't cure their initial form of entry into the United States, and that's why they continue remaining ineligible for adjustment of status. The only solution for them was to leave the U.S. and go through the U.S. consulate abroad, but then they could incur the 10-year or 3-year ban because of unlawful presence in the U.S. But now that matter has been put to rest. Now, then, granted, some federal courts, there's been litigation in federal courts and some circuits, for example, 9th Circuit specifically stated, and the 4th Circuit specifically stated that the TPS holders who traveled without authorization, they could return to the U.S., who entered without authorization, but then got the TPS and traveled with authorization, they would become eligible for adjustment of status. But there's always been this uncertainty. There's been conflict between the decision of the Board of Immigration Appeals and the federal courts, and depending on the circuit and location of the client, we've always been advising that it may or may not work. Now, that question has been put to rest by the USCIS itself, who issued a policy memorandum which says that if you have a TPS, currently temporary protected status in the U.S., and you got advance parole pursuant to your TPS, and you traveled outside of the United States and returned back to the U.S., and your TPS has not been terminated, and your travel authorization wasn't terminated, that entry qualifies you for adjustment of status as long as you have basis for adjustment of status. So, for example, it could be, employment basis, or it could be well, the employment wouldn't work because you didn't have a status before the TPS. But it could be the marriage-based case, for example, a marriage with a United States citizen. So this is great news for the TPS holders. And in practice, there are some individuals. Like, for example, we have a client from Ukraine who entered the United States without any kind of inspection or lawful status. Now, we are obtaining TPS for this Ukrainian citizen who eventually will get a travel authorization and who will travel outside the U.S. and be readmitted to the U.S., and that person will become eligible for adjustment of status. So that's great news, And it's also great news just that because it puts this matter to the rest. There has always been this uncertainty, and lots of poor individuals who were on temporary protected status were uncertain whether they can adjust their status and become permanent residents and eventual citizens in the United States, despite the fact that they've been married with U.S. citizens, they have children in the United States, they have deep roots in the United States. They were still ineligible for adjustment of status. So this is great news. Thank you for listening. We'll continue bringing all the good news that the USCIS and the current administration is improving the immigration system. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe to our channel.